Good afternoon, everyone, again. So we are going to kickstart the program. So I'll start by first really appreciating distinguished colleagues that we have here, the editors of the book, also the contributors really to the book, the students that we have based, and also our wonderful online audience. This is a hybrid event for the launch of the book, and the book is titled Intellectual Property Rights of the Goals in Africa. We also want to especially acknowledge with appreciation the presence of the Dean of the Faculty of Law here at Western Cape, and then also the head of the Private Law Department, who are also here with us. It is very key to mention that one of the editors of the book, Desmond, his own department is the Department of Private Law. So to that extent, it's also important that we acknowledge the head of the Department of Private Law. So a bit of ground housekeeping rules that would guide us through today's program. For those of us joining online, say that please you should put up your microphones, you should really help. And when it gets to that point, when we're going to engage with some questions, then you can put us on down. And then also for those of us in the room, there will be a dedicated Q&A session to happen later in the program. And we have a very packed program, we should say, but we're going to try our best to make sure that we don't eat too much into the time and that we have all the issues dealt with in due course. So to kick off the program, we have opening remarks that we need some institutional leads that in one way or the other affiliated with this book project. And kicking off this opening remarks, I'll start with Professor Vivian Labak, who is the director of the African Fintech Innovation.
It's good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you. I hope everybody can hear me also online. And by way of introduction, as some of you might know, we have established the Center for African Fintech Innovation and Law last year, and we had some of you attended online, like Dr. Lube, and others who attended our launch on the 30th of October. You attended online, so you may be aware of our center. I want to say one or two things about the center, and especially fintech and the interconnectedness that we actually have between what we are doing at the center and your book. The global economy is undergoing a sustained transformation driven by technological advancement and innovation. And this transformation is increasingly visible in the expansion of the digital economy and in the digitalization of both private and public sector activities. And within the financial sector, these developments are commonly understood to fall under the broad umbrella of fintech or financial technology. And this involves the use of digital technologies to enable new business models, processes, products, and services, especially in ways that result in financial innovation, transformation, and disruption in the financial sector. So you might think now, what does that got to do with the IP rights that you are discussing in the context of sustainable development? And the reason for this is that, number one, innovation does not always only relate to technological innovation, as most of us know. The second reason is that outside of or beyond the financial sector, the fintech and other forms of innovations have wider economic relevance. And here, the important thing that I also want to mention is that at a global level, the Bali Fintech Agenda, which was jointly prepared by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, highlights the role of fintech in strengthening financial development, improving inclusion and efficiency, and supporting sustainable growth. And on this basis, the Bali Fintech Agenda links also with the United Nations SDGs and the African Union desires in terms of its digital transformations strategy. And why we are here today is now our center has 3 hubs. We are a multidisciplinary center, and the first hub that I also coordinate is the Fintech Law and Regulation Hub. And Prof. Desmond O is our coordinator. Yes, I know why he's laughing. I'll get it right eventually, Desmond. He is our coordinator of the Innovation and Data Law Hub. And then we also have a special projects hub. Now, for those of you that are in the innovation and the IP rights space, we know that there are 2 things. You cannot neatly separate what you're doing in IP from what we're doing, especially even in data law as well, Desmond. And secondly, as a center, we are very interested in collaboration. And for us, it's such a wonderful opportunity to be hosting you here today. And I hope that that will also signal to all of you here, the authors, the press, of course, your press, as well as the reviewers that are here today that will be speaking to the chapters. Congratulations. We hope that when we're having some light snacks afterwards, that we can talk about how we take this collaboration beyond this auspicious occasion today. We look forward to hearing and listening to the chapter contributions, and welcome at UWC. And I should probably have said all protocols. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lava, for that. And I think I should just pick up on something that Professor Lava did mention, which is the interconnection that you have amongst these different fields. In my own case, this is almost like a 360 moment for me, in the sense that when I started out law practice, I started out in IP practice. And I worked briefly while doing copyright, domain name, trademarks, and what have you. And at some point, I was asking myself a question: why am I in this field? Especially because I am not in creative. I wasn't creative IP, so to say. And I thought to myself, maybe I should explore other areas. And I did explore the areas, and now I do more work around technology policy and regulation. But what I also did notice was the fact that even in the course of doing my fintech work or technology law and policy regulation work, IP issues still come up. Again, in this whole conversation around AI, everybody's talking about who owns the data and is AI-generated work copyrightable and those kind of issues. So ultimately, one can almost make the argument that in some way, IP is almost like the mother of most of these other commercial areas that we do in. So thank you for highlighting that. So picking up from Professor Lavak's opening remark, we are going to be calling the next person to give our opening remarks, and that is the section chair of Intellectual Property Innovation and Development at the University of Cape Town, Professor Camping Tufunubi. And I should also mention that one of the editors of the book as well has doing capacity of faculty university. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Dean, Professor DeVille, Head of Department, Professor Mpankavani, Director of the Center hosting us today, Professor Lavak, colleagues, students, family, and friends. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm looking around the room and I'm just beaming because in every corner I see a friend, former colleague, and indeed family members. So we bring greetings from the University of Cape Town, the SACHI Chair in IP Innovation and Development. Several of us are joining us online, but in person, I brought with me my colleagues, Dr. Torerai and Dr. Olusenta, Nate Botoras. We're very pleased to be here with you today. So the linkages between intellectual property and sustainable development are critical and ever so important. In view of recent global crises, like you can all think about the pandemic, everybody is fully aware of food insecurity on this continent and beyond. And of course, we're all sweating. Climate change is all around us. intellectual property is a lens through which we can talk about all of this. And this is what this beautiful volume does. I want to highlight just 3 things about the volume. If time permitted me, I could, of course, wax lyrical about the volume the whole day, but I cannot. I have 5 minutes. So I'm going to pick 3 things that strike me as remarkable about this volume. So the first thing for me is that it is always important to anchor your scholarly contributions in reality. Otherwise, the book is not interesting. It's so divorced from our reality. So for me, centering this contribution in national context is key. And so when you pick up the book or when you look at it online, you will see that it does precisely that. It goes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, looking at a number of things. Just a few examples. It talks about geographical indications in Zimbabwe, Morocco, and South Africa. It hops across to Kenya and talks about plant variety protection in Kenya. It also spends time talking about Tanzania and Nigeria. So it is a volume that canvasses the African continent. The second hallmark feature that I want to talk about in this very short while is the broad spectrum of intellectual property rights with which this volume interfaces. So I've cited chapters talking about geographical indications. I've spoken about plant variety protection, but when you pick up the book, you will see it also talks about trademarks, it talks about copyright, and of course it speaks about patent. So it covers that broad scope of intellectual property rights. The third thing that I want to speak about is relevance. There is no point in writing a book or reading it if it's not relevant. So what makes a book relevant? What makes a book relevant is whether it answers questions that occupy your mind. There may be old questions, there may be new questions. In that respect, the volume does not disappoint. It engages with old questions such as the protection of traditional knowledge. It engages with new and emerging questions such as AI and copyright, and so it is relevant and timely. Those are the 3 things I wanted to speak about. So those who know me know that I always speak in 3s, right? If you ask me to speak, I'll say 3 things. So that's the 3 things. As the launch progresses, you'll hear a lot more about the volume. I'm sure you'll be engrossed, you will enjoy it. If you haven't read the volume, you are going to read the volume and enjoy it. And the last thing I wanted to say before I sit down is that I want to express gratitude and appreciation for the deep and constant and consistent collaboration between our 2 institutions, particularly within the area of intellectual property. Albizo is nodding because you were with us in July at UCT, so was Prof. Mbangabanu, and a lot of colleagues do come across between UCT and UWC when we have events. So we see each other often at conferences, at webinars, at symposia. We support each other in a variety of ways. Many of us serve as external examiners for each other. We mentor each other's students. We co-edit books and journals. And so there is a deep, constant, and consistent collaboration. And from today onwards, we will, of course, I've promised that we'll formalize it and we'll dig deeper and produce lots more work. So I want to end by saying congratulations to the 3 co-editors of this volume. Congratulations also to the contributing authors to each and every chapter. We value your scholarly interventions, we enjoy them, and we know that they are for the benefit of our beloved continent. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for highlighting those 3 headings of what's very, very defining about the book, and beyond that, also projecting that need really for collaboration in the academic space. And for me, when I opened the book, one thing that really jumped at me was looking at contributors. And when you do that, you're going to support something, which is the fact that there are diversity in 2 key areas. So the first area of diversity I did support was really the balance between different points of engagement with the field. So you would see the balance between those in the policy field, those in academia, and then also those in practice. And that is not something you often see in the IP field folks, so to say. Sometimes it's mostly a piece of academics coming together to write, but practitioners doing their own practice, so to say. So it's very good that the book strikes that balance between having these different points of engagement. So you haven't really the best resource, so to say. And then the other point of also, the other defining part of the diversity is in terms of the spread of the jurisdiction, which is also what the certificate mentioned, the spread of the jurisdictions that engage within it. So you see quite a number of African countries. And then also the authors are also well spread in terms of different jurisdictions within the continent that we have presently. So picking up on that, we are going to move to the next institutional lead to also give us our opening remarks, and that is the head of the private law department, Professor Yuka. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and to our distinguished guests, a warm welcome. We acknowledge the fact that we have got guests and our colleagues from UCT, and we are excited that you are here at UWC today for this special occasion. It is an honor for me to stand here before you as we gather to mark the launch of this special book. It is a special occasion, and we are also excited to see that our colleagues, family is here. Thank you so much for coming. We can see that you have been supporting Professor Oriakhogba, and we also want to celebrate with you together with Prof as well. The moment represents dedication and resilience, not only to the authors, but like I said, to everyone who contributed in one way or the other, especially to our authors who made a contribution in terms of the chapters. So we recognize your hard work, and we recognize the fact that you are contributing not only to the area of IP, but to more than IP as well. As you can see that there are contributions from different authors. So to all the authors, congratulations and well done. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us, whether in person and to those who are online as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that opening remarks, and very importantly, really for acknowledging the families. So beyond those that write, you have those that actually are part of them, supporting them. We also have to acknowledge our families that have to sit down and listen to sometimes our very boring theories about what we're writing. I know in my own case, I'm a bit fortunate because my wife is also in the research field. And even though she's in the research field, sometimes when I speak of my topics, she's like, what are you saying? And when she also speaks of her topics, I'm like, what are you saying? So well, we find a way to encourage each other. So thank you so much to the families of the tutors and the contributors, because you are holding the pen as well when they were doing the writing, or at least typing to the keyboard when they were doing that. And we are, from the opening remarks we've had so far, we can see at this point we have a sense of really what we are engaging with, or what the book engages with. We know generally that, we can say generally that the book looks at that intersection between IP as well as sustainable development. So beyond that, you'd also see areas where our own very own continental agenda 2063 also comes up in that conversation. In case study approach in different jurisdictions. But again, this is the key guidance. We're going to go to the next stage of the program, where we're going to have Dr. Charlene Osiza come and introduce the book in better detail than I have done now. And because of our presentation, she's going to show more light on the rationale of the book, its central of themes, and then some certain argument stance across the book. But in mind, listening to this does not make sure that this is just a very brief and short book. So it's just to almost see that why you should not only buy the book, but also read it.
Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, family, those who are in the room and those who are online. Thank you so much for hosting us here at UWC. I see the dean is here. I didn't expect him to be here. So thank you so much. And the head of department and the head of the center and my own boss is here, Professor Caroline. So to be honest, this is a moment of pride for me. For the longest time, I've wanted to have my name on a book. Not just a chapter in a book, like on the front cover. So when Desmond approached me, he's like, do you want to be a co-editor of this book? And I explained to him, I'm like, Desmond, this is tough, you see. I've never really done it. He's like, no, you've published before, we can do this, you know. And I'm honestly grateful for that opportunity. It's been a difficult journey, coordinating, getting authors to come together, to flesh out their arguments, to polish the referencing. It's those small things that require a lot of effort. But I'm grateful that we are here now and the book is here. So to those who know me, they know that sometimes I'm stubborn, sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes I'm stubborn, and it takes a long time for me to fully absorb the moment. So thank you so much all for being here today. Now, so this book, I think the speakers who came before me have spoken about how it's quite diverse. The key features of the book, the authors. I'm going to follow Professor Ngobe's strategy and highlight 3 things. So the first thing I'll highlight is the depth of engagement. We find a lot of discussion around IP and SDGs across the world as it relates to other regions. But we've never had something that really focuses on Africa with our unique realities. And this does not mean to say Africa is a monolith. I'm just saying African problems are quite unique. They are different, but we have similar issues somewhere. And I think this book does that. When I was reading, as I was going through the chapters, I was finding similarities and problems that they have in enforcement, say in Uganda, and what we have in Zimbabwe, that's where I'm from, what we have in South Africa. There are areas that are lacking that we all find challenging. So to be different, but also find challenges, that is unique. And then the breadth of scholarly engagement. Some are academics, some are practitioners, some are policymakers. And their approach to IP, focusing on development, is quite central and common, right? That we all think of IP as a tool of development. But there's that reflection to say IP can be a hindrance to development, right? That moment of reflection in how they address the different chapters in the book and the different policy issues that they encounter in their unique jurisdictions. I found that to be very engaging. And then the last thing that I probably want to mention is the case studies in the book. So beyond just analysis of legal frameworks and policies, we have case studies that engage in more depth with how IP actually works in communities. And I think that's what's also very key. It's much easier to criticize a law, but it's much more complex to think about the impact of that law in a community. It requires more than just legal thinking skills, but social legal skills to speak to people about complex issues such as IP. So I'm also grateful for that we cover in the book. Now, the book arose from the All Africa IP Summit of 2024, and that was the theme. So the different authors are people who attended that conference, produced their papers, which became the chapters, and a few others we thought we want to contribute chapters to this volume. So it's the first of its kind, as far as we are aware, that engages IP and SDGs in Africa. And for that, I think we've broken new ground. We've charted new frontiers. And last but not least, I hope I'm still within time. Last but not least, looking forward, I think the book highlights instances where we might need to think more deeply and engage more deeply around IP issues in Africa. The one thing that stems crucially for me is around food security. The book discusses plant variety rights. It discusses patents. It discusses geographical indications to the extent that they affect food security and relate to climate change on the continent. I think these are key issues. AI is all the rage, but we forget we need to eat. I think that's one thing where IP scholarly works are lacking. The area of climate change and food security. And I'm glad that this book is charting new frontiers and engagements in that space. And I hope you all get to read it. I hope you all get to engage with the different authors. There are some who are online, I think. I hope there's some in the room who will talk about the different chapters that they have. I do want to pick out a few so that I sound like I'm favoring certain chapters. So I would rather leave those chapter authors to speak about their chapters, and you can get more information from that. So feel free to ask us any questions about the chapters, about the book, and I'm hoping this collaboration with UWC continues, especially because one of the most hardworking people I know is based here. And thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charlene, for that overview of the book and also the rationale really and the setting of context through which this book came through. And you will notice from Dr. Charlene's presentation, the overview of the book, that it's not communication. Not just acknowledging the work that she has put in, but also the other 4 papers of the book as well as the contributors to the book. Back then in primary school, there was this thing that you pass very well in the course. We simply say paper. People would then see the field. I take all the praise for that. And anything don't go so well, the lecturers also. So we're going to bring that balance into what the editors and also the contributors of the book have done. So we've heard about the overview, we've listened to the overview of the book. Now this next stage of the launch would be to actually have the external people that are external to the book, reviewers, coming to also tell us that all that Dr. Charlene has said is in fact one of the leaders. Now we have 2 reviewers for the book. The first is Dr. Inekela Ihuwa. I'm going to be briefly going through the profile of the reviewer before I invite her to make the review. Dr. Inekela Ihuwa earned her PhD in law from the University of Cape Town and a Master of Laws from the University of Stellenbosch. She also holds a postgraduate diploma in higher education from the University of Benin. She has more than 10 years of experience in higher education and transitioned to private practice in 2024. She has authored several reviewed articles, presented at various conferences, and is currently involved in 2 book projects, LexisNexis and Taylor and Francis. Research interests include intellectual property law, commercial law, and their relationship with development. And from this profile, we see we're going to be having the right person to review it, not just from the theoretical lens of the book, but also the practical lens of the book. And then in addition to that, this is also the field of review. So we kindly invite Dr. Ihuwa to provide her review and reflections of the book. Dr. Ihuwa is joining us online.
Good afternoon. I'd like to stand on the protocol that has been established. Firstly, I'd just like to say I'm very honored to have been given this opportunity to review this volume and offer my viewpoint on what it's all about. I think I have to start off by saying that one of my keen interests is always linking the law to development. And I think that it is at the heart of every researcher in this continent. We all want to see the best way that we can advance the countries that we reside in and Africa at large. Now, when it comes to intellectual property protection and sustainable development, this is an ongoing debate all across the world. But when it comes to Africa, I think it's a rather urgent debate. And it's one that I think can be used to address key challenges that we are facing, such as access to essential medications. I think Prof. Kube referred to the pandemic and how we all essentially had to rely on vaccines from certain countries and so forth, and the going-ons around that access. When you consider the African context, there is the issue of climate change and how that's impacting food security. And of course, you'd want to see how intellectual property protection either supports or complicates that. And so we also have a critical aspect, which is our traditional knowledge that is being exploited, has been exploited, and how can we actually use that knowledge to benefit the development of the communities where it's derived from, while safeguarding it from exploitation. So this book, Intellectual Property Rights and Sustainable Development Goals in Africa, I think is a very timely one. It addresses issues aimed at let me rephrase that. It addresses the issues pertaining to access to medicines, barriers to agricultural innovations that affect food security, traditional knowledge systems, artificial intelligence, and it does this by actually highlighting whether IP protection supports the achievement of sustainable development goals, or it complicates it, and essentially the intersection between the two. Now, Prof. Des, Charlene, and Send, I think, did a remarkable job in this, and together with the authors, of course. They essentially, I think from my calculation, it's just over 25 authors that have contributed to this volume, and it covers several jurisdictions and even detailed analysis of some, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe. It also then goes into regional organizations such as WIPO or ORP. And I think that taking these jurisdictions, taking intellectual property, taking the sustainable development goals and analyzing all that within the several sectors that have been mentioned and that I've also referred to: agriculture, public health, SME development, financing, data protection, and so forth. I think it's a well put together piece, and it's regionally specific, which I think is a very welcome output, because most times in our research we'll find writings on countries that we cannot really relate because our context is different, and so it's specific to our experiences and our perspectives, and I think that is what makes it such a wonderful product and volume to come out at this point in time. And I think what the book highlights is that we need to move away from IP law that is solely focused on protection of private rights, and actually use this intellectual property and establish frameworks that are aimed at using IP as a tool for sustainable development. And so I really think that a compelling case has been made throughout the book on how African IP systems can be used to address the experiences and challenges faced within the African context, moving away now from what we've been reading all along, essentially publications that are aimed at the global north. So not to waste time or repeat what has already been said, I think that the alignment of IP analysis with SDGs results in a book or research output that can be used by courts, policymakers, regional organizations, and they can use this volume to reinterpret the IP obligations and look at them through a developmental lens. How can we take on the obligations that we have undertaken when it comes to IP protection and use them as a tool to actually advance our economies and communities at large? So I think that it is a book that will be used by not only scholars, policymakers, and law reformers, but also institutions that are looking to engage on an analysis of the intersection between IP and sustainable development in Africa. So I would just like to say it's a very, I think it was a very big task that was undertaken, but it is one that has been executed well. And so my only hope is that the second edition will perhaps cover more case studies from different African countries. And I think that is all I have to say from my side. Congratulations to all the authors and well done to the editors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Linekela, for that very balanced reflection on the book. We would note that Dr. Linekela not only spoke to the strength of the book, especially the depth of the book, the timeliness of the topic. Don't look at some of the invading IP issues that have to deal with, but also almost giving the editors a hint of what they should do next. So you have some work in your hands. And on that note, and the next review will be coming from Dr. Anthony Kakuza. And as I did with the previous review, I'll also briefly go through the profile of Dr. Anthony Kakuza before he proceeds with the review. But I understand he did make a recording, so he's not going to be presenting in person. So we'll have the people help us project that presentation. So briefly, the profile of Dr. Anthony Kakuza is at the firm Advocates, where he leads the firm's intellectual property practice. He is the acting head of the commercial law department at the School of Law at Makerere University in Uganda, where he teaches property and cyber, intellectual property and cyber. He serves as a visiting professor of intellectual property law at the University of Benin, United States, Shandong University in China, and the University of Benin. Previously held visiting positions at Cornell Law in the United States, Maastricht University in Czech Republic, and the University of Rwanda. Dr. Kakuza is the current chair of the Intellectual Property Law Standards Law Society. He also undertakes IP consultancy for Uganda Registration Services Bureau, the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, and the Intellectual Property Organization. He was recently recognized by the World Trademark Review as the WTR Global Leader 2025 and trademark expert in Uganda. This is a very rich profile that we know, same as the previous reviewer. We see that balance between the reviewers that's not only part of academia, but also part of practice. So we've then checked the reflections that Dr. Kakuza has shared with us.
Hi, my name is Anthony Kakuza. I'm going to be giving a review on intellectual property rights and sustainable development goals in Africa. This volume weaves through an analysis of intellectual property rights as integrated with sustainable development. The contribution of intellectual property in the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals is brought out through 19 chapters. This review is not a chapter-by-chapter exploration. However, it starts with the general outlook of the work presented in this book as summarized in the first chapter, highlighting key points of significance. The review follows up with a few other positive pointers to be appreciated in the general context of the work, before picking out on underlying gaps that generally stand out in all the chapters. In the first chapter, titled The Intricate Nexus Between Intellectual Property and Sustainable Development in Africa, the authors, who are also the volume editors, present us with the foundation of the book by providing a general picture as to what the book has to offer. They launch the reader into an understanding of the interface between intellectual property and sustainable development. The chapter naturally starts with a generalized understanding of sustainable development and connects it to the African Union's objectives of achieving high standard of living, quality of life, and well-being of all citizens, among others. The chapter then delves into the global perspective of the linkage between intellectual property and sustainable development goals. A critical point is highlighted wherein it is noted that intellectual property is viewed as a catalyst, tool, or barrier to achieving sustainable development, hence regarding this linkage as quite complex. This thus provokes a question in the reader as to whether this is a general mindset at the global or continental level that can be subjected to re-evaluation or reinterpretation in the future. The authors therefore set a good tone for the reader to anticipate answers to this question from the subsequent chapters. The authors further take note of the fact that intellectual property is not directly mentioned as a goal and is largely absent in the Sustainable Development Agenda, save for the small context of SDG 3 with a focus on public health. But the blame, if I may call it that, for this oversight does not rest entirely on the framers of the SDG, but also cuts across into the intellectual property community. For instance, the authors cite the scholarly work of Abdel Latif and Roth in showing that even intellectual property institutions and norms have struggled to embrace the relevance of sustainable development, hence viewing this as at parallels with intellectual property. This comes across as absurd, where in our appreciation of sustainable development as serving present needs without compromising future needs, naturally, creativity and innovation come into play and cannot be ignored. This is the basis as to why many intellectual property scholars, including yours truly, hold on to the argument that intellectual property rights cut across all SDGs and not only SDG 9, which is on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. The global picture, as presented by the authors, also brings in a thin light at the end of the grey tunnel, showing intellectual property relevance in sustainable development, as depicted in discussions surrounding environmental sustainability and climate change. The authors also throw more light on the African experience, which appears brighter than the global position. This is seen through the context of the 2018 agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, or the AFTA agreement, as well as the adoption of the 2023 protocol on intellectual property rights to the agreement. The concept of sustainable development is a central objective under the AFTA agreement. So in the remaining parts of this chapter, the authors aptly explain the book's research objective and scope, which is premised on a volume of chapters that are 19 in total, with various case and thematic analysis drawn from specific African countries and regional organizations. The parameters through which the intellectual property and SDG linkage is presented throughout the book are within the context of agriculture and food security. We see this in chapters 2 and 3 on geographical indications, as well as chapter 4 on plant variety protection. There's access to medicines and public health in chapter 5 on the South African experience with COVID-19. There is gender empowerment in chapter 16 on promoting small business growth through IP commercialization. There's small business development in Chapter 9 on intellectual property securitization by SMEs in Nigeria, and Chapter 17 on promoting small business in Africa through IP rights commercialization. There's innovation and patent quality in Chapters 6 and 7. There's financing in Chapter 10 on financing Tanzania's creative industries. There's innovation again, Chapter 12 on applying IP to the development of agriculture, health, technology, and biodiversity preservation. And Chapter 14 on the utilization of specific intellectual property rights in achieving SDGs. Then we see entrepreneurship and commercialization in Chapter 8 on commercialization and research. We see data protection in Chapter 11, which is on the synergy between data protection and IP rights. We see traditional knowledge in Chapter 13, which reviews the legal framework governing traditional knowledge in Nigeria. And then artificial intelligence under Chapter 15 on artificial intelligence and copyright. So in reading through the various chapters, one cannot fail to come to terms with the fact that intellectual property rights are not detachable from any of the SDGs. But nonetheless, the authors understandably prioritize specific SDGs within the scope of their respective studies. In this respect, I can highlight a few matters of interest that stand out for me from some of these chapters. Chapter 2, for instance, which explores the potential for geographical indications through the Chipinge coffee of Zimbabwe, focuses on SDGs 2 and 8, that is zero hunger and decent work and economic growth, respectively. However, considering that the goals for agricultural productivity among the small-scale farmers in Zimbabwe include doubling of their incomes or generally economic empowerment, this speaks into SDG 1 as well, which is on no poverty. It is therefore no wonder that Chapter 3, which also covers GIs with highlights from Morocco and South Africa, relates to the geographical indications position to SDGs 1 and 8, though the chapter goes on to also align its study to SDG 5, which is on gender equality, SDG 12, which is on responsible consumption and production, and SDG 16, which is on peace, justice, and effective institutions. These are just a few out of the 17 SDGs, which all feed into one another in terms of relevance to intellectual property rights. Chapter 4 is especially noteworthy in this review. This chapter explores the importance of plant variety protection, or PVP, if I may call it that, with insights from Kenya. The chapter points out global efforts in PVPs through the establishment of the International Union for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants, which is better known as WIPO. Kenya is a signatory to WIPO 1991 Act, which is the international instrument, and was one of the first African nations to join WIPO. However, what is glaringly missing in this chapter is a highlight of the key SDGs that are addressed by PVPs. One would have expected the author to directly mention in the mere list of all SDG 2 on zero hunger, SDG 12 on responsible consumption and production, SDG 13 on measures to combat climate change, and SDG 15 on life on Earth. Although the chapter puts up a good argument on PVPs and food security, the direct relation to these SDGs would have been even more enriching for the book. It is also surprising that although Kenya is a signatory to the Arusha Protocol for the protection of new varieties of plants under the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, or ARIPO, this key detail is not mentioned anywhere in the chapter. By mentioning UPOV, TRIPS Agreement, and the Convention on Biological Diversity, the author shows an appreciation of international treaties and the role they play in influencing the direction of domestic legislation towards SDGs. As such, the role of the Arusha Protocol in Kenya is also worth mentioning. Another matter of concern in the book relates to the apparent imbalance in the presentation of interest of intellectual property rights holders and intellectual property rights users. we should remain cognizant to the fact that the SDGs are a global action or a global call to action in addressing poverty, environmental concerns, and the promotion of peace and prosperity by 2030. In the context of intellectual property rights, however, such rights, by virtue of their commercial nature, are more inclined to individual or in personam interests as opposed to the common interests of the community. It is therefore more necessary to explore how intellectual property rights within SDG goals can be skewed towards the latter interests, which are best explored through intellectual property rights exceptions and limitations. Ideally, as such, it would be an essential test in the review of this book to ask the question whether the exploration of intellectual property rights and SDGs in Africa presents a balance between the interests of intellectual property rights holders on the one hand and the broader societal needs on the other hand, such as education, health, and environmental protection, which are broadly covered under the SDGs. From a reviewer's perspective, there is a total imbalance in the sense that the volume of chapters in this book is focused more on the interests of intellectual property rights holders and how their intellectual property rights contribute to the SDGs, as opposed to how the same SDGs can be attained through a utilization of the underlying exceptions and limitations in intellectual property rights in Africa, or a balance of both IP holder and user interests. Nonetheless, the case studies and thematic analysis presented in this book are a very insightful addition to the scholarship on African intellectual property rights. The underlying gaps as highlighted in this review make the case for good follow-up on a subsequent volume of the study compilations. This is a book worth reading in the general understanding as to where intellectual property rights fall in the agenda of SDGs in Africa. Thank you.
We've heard from editors of the book. We've also had the reviewers give us almost that external or detached perspective of the book, which, as we all agree, they confirm the richness of the book, but also to highlight areas for future volumes. So on that note, we're now going to also go to a third stage, which is to hear from some of the contributors. Because apart from the work that the editors have done in putting the book together, we also now have specific individuals that wrote on specific topics, which make up this editor group. And when we started, we said we're not going to only be protecting and preserving the intellectual property right. We are also going to be protecting time. So we don't get deep into our time so that we can also go about other activities that we might have in front of you. So each of there are five contributors that will be giving us some few insights into the chapters that they've written. And each of the contributors have 3 minutes to really just give us a teaser into the book. And not to spell out all the arguments that they've made or the scope of focus, so to say, but just to give us a sense of what this chapter is about and some of the central arguments in the chapter. And we have all the contributors online. So we will be taking each of those contributors one after the other. And I will be starting with Professor Chijioke Okorie, who is with the University of Pretoria. Professor Okorie wrote chapter 6 of the book. Please, Prof, if you can hear us, you can proceed with your own reflection on your chapter. And you have 3 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, my video is not on. There's a lot going on here. But thank you for the kind introduction and mentioning that I co-authored chapter 6 of the book, Unlocking Innovation, Paving the Way for High Quality Patents and Sustainable Development in South Africa. I co-authored that chapter with Darren Smith, who is not here with us. In a nutshell, that chapter just examines what I think is a very simple question, which is, what is a high quality patent, and does South Africa's patent system produce high-quality patents. Since the adoption of the TRIPS agreement in 1995, South Africa has aligned its patent framework with global minimum standards. And under the Patents Act, an invention needs to be new, it needs to involve an inventive step, and it needs to be capable of industrial application. And in return, the patentee would receive a 20-year monopoly. The system, the patent system, is built on some sort of bargain, which is that society grants temporary exclusivity in exchange for meaningful public disclosure of new knowledge. And this is justified by the reward and incentive theories of IP. If it works well, patents would stimulate innovation, technology transfer, and long-term public benefit. But the central argument of our chapter is that the design of South Africa's patent system undermines this bargain because South Africa operates a depository system, which means that at the point of the grant, there is no substantive search and examination to verify whether an invention truly meets all those patentability standards. So as a result, patents may and have been granted without rigorous scrutiny. And the question of whether that patent is valid or not is often postponed to expensive court litigation when we start having revocation proceedings. And so this creates the space for what we call in the chapter low quality patents, patents that don't meet the robust technical or legal standards, and it enables practices like evergreening and so on. And for us in that chapter, we're saying that this is a development issue. It's not just a legal issue because patent quality is directly linked to SDG goals, SDG 9, SDG 10, SDG 17. And in that chapter, we explore solutions by undertaking a comparative analysis with India. I urge you to read that chapter to see the reforms that we proposed as solutions for South Africa. Thank you for the opportunity. I will stop here now.
Thank you so much, Prof. That was very comprehensive, but also very clear. We get the message of what the chapter seeks to do. And next, we're going to be calling on Ms. Catherine Makwara to also give us her reflection on her chapter, which is chapter 5 of the book.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be speaking on chapter 5, which I co-authored with Professor Desmond as well as Professor Mpangawani. So basically, our chapter is titled Patent Regimes and Public Health, Unpacking the Strategies to the Realization of SDG 3 in South Africa. So basically, our chapter sought to address a question that became impossible to ignore during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was that how do we reward pharmaceutical innovation whilst ensuring that people can actually have access to life-saving drugs? So when we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a high turnover of vaccines that were being developed. But in the same breath, with the problem where the access to that vaccines was basically unequal, both on a price point as well as on quantity. For example, AstraZeneca vaccine in the EU was costing around $2 US dollars, and in South Africa, it was costing around $5. So that inequality on a price point and quantity made people term the problem that we had during COVID-19 as a vaccine apartheid. So our chapter situates the discussion within the framework of Sustainable Development Goal 3, in particularly 3B, which calls for affordable medicines, access to affordable medicines. So firstly, we examined the intersection between our patent legislation, patent law, and the right to health, to say that in as much as we have Section 27 of the Constitution allowing or promoting the right to access of healthcare services, patent law, especially the patent monopoly, which in turn wants to incentivize research and development, sort of interferes with the realization of that right. So some of the patent-related barriers that we discovered in our research was that firstly, there was an issue of evergreening, where there were minor changes to patents related to medicines, which delayed entry of generic competition. There was also the issue of pay for delay agreements and excessive pricing, where we situated sort of in a competition law perspective by virtue of saying that the patent owner creates a monopoly, because for the 20-year period that you have your own patent, you determine the pricing, you determine the quantity, you determine who you supply to. So in a bid to propose reforms to try and address that issue, we covered issues of compulsory licensing. We also covered an issue of temporary IP waivers and patent law reform. To say that in as much as we have patents that are being protected, there was no substantive examination. So in short, we're trying to say that we are not anti-patent, but how best do we have a situation where we balance both the patent monopoly and the rights, as well as the rights to access to medicines? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Catherine, for that reflection. And again, as one speaker earlier mentioned, these are very practical issues. In COVID, it's something that we all engaged with, it's something we all experience. So to that extent, this is not just a theoretical discussion or debate, it's really engaging with some of the legal issues or IP issues that have emerged from an experience that we all lived with. And that will take me to the next contributor, Ms. Cynthia Ikodo, who is a legal practitioner in Nigeria, to also then share her reflection on chapter 7 of the book. Okay, we don't have her in the house, so we'll then move to the next contributor, Dr. Shimangazo Ukevo from Northwest University, who is the author of chapter 7, to also then share his reflection on that chapter with us. 3 minutes, please, for the reflection.
Thank you, Program Director. My name is Shimangazo and I'm from Northwest University, as the Program Director has indicated. My chapter is actually examining the link between intellectual property and sustainable development in Africa. And the first thing that it does, it actually indicates that intellectual property is the driver of sustainable development. And in the context of Africa, it also applies. However, as the chapter progresses, it shows that we are having challenges in Africa to utilize intellectual property to our best advantage. For an example, one of the arguments that were raised in the chapter is that the current intellectual property framework or architecture actually reflects the Western and European perspectives of what intellectual property is. And as a result, sometimes it doesn't necessarily favor the African community. And that is why, from the decolonial perspective, it is argued that we need to have an intellectual property framework that actually reflects the needs of African society. While it has been also noted that IP is the driver of sustainable development, it has been indicated that in Africa we are facing the issue of legal framework fragmentation, whereby each and every country wants to try to develop its own IP framework, which is not wrong, but however, it will be wise to have a framework that actually addresses all the needs that African people need. Because if you look at the challenges that are being faced by Zimbabwe, you will see that they are most likely to be challenges faced by South Africa, by Uganda, etc. We share the same problem. So why can't we just find one comprehensive framework that actually addresses the problems that we have? And also another argument that was raised in the issue is the contemporary debate about IP and also the issue of traditional or indigenous knowledge, whereby it has been discovered that there's so much potential in this knowledge to actually develop Africa. But however, we do not have, or rather, even though what the continent is busy trying to come up with a framework to regulate this is not yet complete. So it is still an ongoing project that we need to contribute to. For an example, if you talk about the issue of IP protocol that has already been developed, the AU and relevant stakeholders are busy. They are to actually finalize the annex to that protocol. So we must contribute to that. We must give in ideas as to how do we think this knowledge and its associated resources should be protected for the purposes of actually developing our continent. Yeah, that is what the chapter actually outline, and I also invite you to go and read and see how I argued for a reformed IP framework that addresses these common challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you so much, Dr. Shimagazu. I think two things I did pick from that very brief and also very clear overview. I would say one is around really, there's no one size fits approach that we should adopt really in trying to see how we can use IP as a way to address some of the challenges we see on the continent, especially from a sustainable development perspective. But at the same time, there's also that need to address the fragmentation of the frameworks we see. We should have a more unified approach of some sort to how we deal with the issue. Thank you so much, Doc. And then we go to the last chapter contributor, which is Ms. Sarah Isamuyu from the Uganda Industrial Research Institute, to also reflect on chapter 17 of the book.
Good afternoon. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Basically, my chapter was looking at promoting small businesses in Africa through intellectual property commercialization. And my argument is that the heart of most African economies lie under behind the strengths of SMEs. Small businesses are absolutely the heart of Africa, making 90% of all our businesses and providing 70% of jobs in African economies. But as much as we have this hidden asset, there's a biggest problem that these small businesses are working under the brute force, more or less the survival mode. They rely on hard work and daily sales, which is not sustainable. They have, of course, they have the creation of mind, they have the brand names, they have all these innovations, the beautiful designs, but they are not officially registered. They don't have their IPs registered. So the treasure, when you look at this, you have the treasure, but without locking it up, you're bound to lose it because anyone is going to copy it and steal it. And that's what the biggest problem has been. So how do we flip the script? We flip the script by encouraging these SMEs to protect, to have their innovations protected, but they should not look at IP as a shield to hide behind, but they should look at it as an economic asset, a commercial asset to wield their businesses and have. I believe for me, IP is more of a generational wealth asset for generations to come if we look at it and use it in a proper way. And I believe that if we have this two lead umbrella strategy that I think can work for these SMEs, that is generally renting IPs, and this is licensing. You rent your IP and make some little money at the end of the day. It's just like you have a house, you've built a house and you get income out of the house. for me, that is a sustainable way. Two is collateral. If these SMEs have collateral, if they can use their IP as a collateral, it's more of securing finances, because the biggest problem that SMEs have in Africa is capital. When you talk to most of them, they lack capital, and truth be told, if the cash flow is limited, then these businesses are bound to collapse. And if we have these two strategies, of course, we are going to build nations, not just businesses, but we are going to have collective wealth generational businesses across the continent. And if this happens, then gender equality is looked at, the SDG 5, which will help in leveling and playing with helping women, because at the end of the day, when you look at SMEs across Africa, women play a big role in all these small businesses. Then the decent jobs that are created by these SMEs, then the sustainable cities, the local, coming up with solutions that are tailored to our local problems. For me, that makes more sense than having a copy and paste. And I think that's for me. That's what chapter 17 summarizes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that reflection. And at this point, we've heard from the editors, we've heard from the book reviewers, and we've also heard from individual support to achieve this. Let's also extend that warm gesture to the different chapter contributors. Then also to the book reviewers, really, that took their time to read what the book in bold, which is not an easy task to see, because it's like 19 chapters if I'm not wrong. So we took the time to read and then give very constructive feedback on both the strengths and areas that we see that in terms of even the chapter contributors can improve on in subsequent publications. So also a round of applause to them. And then also to you for sitting and also listening, because again, it takes a lot of patience, a lot of energy to listen, really, especially in an area that might not be your field. Not all of us here are scholars or experts like Professor Desmond and Dr. Shalin and Professor Carson. So for us, some of the things we're hearing now, we're hearing them from the very first. So please also a round of applause to each and every one in the house and also those on the and then last but not the least, in the program, I am described as the moderator, but I think one of the chapter contributors called me the program director. And you could see the smile on my face when I heard that. I feel that's a better nomenclature for people like me. So yeah, and those a round of applause for the program director. So we did step down one of the opening remarks from Mr. San Bakalu. But I think we have him now to also share his insights. He's one of the editors of the book. So I think we should be patient on that to actually also hear him speak. Mr. Sand, I don't know if you're able to speak to us.
Yes, I think I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you as well. Please shoot.
Yeah, so sincere apologies for my inability to connect. The technical issue is one of those things that we have to address as Africans, connecting to Microsoft Teams and the disruption of network. The truth is that we have started a journey years back when we started discussing IP from the summit perspective. Our idea was clear. We want IP to work for Africa and Africans, and we want Africans themselves to contribute to the knowledge of IP. My opening remark is thus. Thank you very much, Professor Desmond, for and investor Westcape for agreeing to host us in this launch. Thank Dr. Shalin for also participating and doing the hard work of editing of all the contributors from different parts of Africa. So from All African IP Summit perspective, we believe that this is a journey we have started where Africans write about IP, because IP is not abstract. IP is what we produce every day as Africans, and we should from it, and we should be able to contribute to the body of knowledge. So because we have gone through this process and we published this, I heard some of the contributors also advising that the new chapter, of course, will continue in this part, but most importantly is that the SDGo and connectivity to IP has been produced in the African context, because we all know that SDGo will expire maybe in 2030, I think maybe because it's subject to review. If it comes to an end, and up to this moment, we've not at contextualizing IP and SDGo in the African reality, and we've achieved that feat. So we must commend ourselves there. IP, as I say, is not an abstract, it's an enabler of trade, it's an enabler of investment and sustainability of our community. We have to move it from just the writing to the practicalization of these IPs. We should not also discard writing, because sometimes when we say moving writing, practicalization of IP, we said it's not to write. Academics are key because they are the custodians of knowledge. However, industry people are also key. In my opening remark, middle remark, is that we have done well for ourselves. We have published the book where the world will also read and also understand what is going on in Africa, but we have to do more. We have to continue writing. We have to continue publishing in our own reality. So at the end of the day, everybody in Africa, we understand that IP is not a Western issue, but it's an African issue that will help to grow. For example, Sarah talked about the small businesses in not registered, but doing business over the years. They might not be able to scale if they don't protect their intellectual property right. We also talk about the conflict between countries building up IP systems that will not speak to the neighboring country in Africa. So we have to, while we know that nations build up their own system, this now we can then bring the policymakers to tune that if you design anything, it must speak to the neighboring country, especially with AFCFTA. If small business, startup business, it's important they formalize to document and to register the IP. And that brings me to my conclusion. Whatever we do, policymakers must ensure that whatever design in policy, it must be practicable and it must sustain, it must contribute to our sustainable development goal, whatever we set off ourselves. Our sustainable goal from All African IP Summit, and I believe for everybody that sits in the room, is to see that Africa address the issue of poverty. Africa address the issue of underdevelopment. Africa is developed collectively because it's to the good of us and to the good of the globe. Thank you very much. Mr. Program Director.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sandmbach. In fact, I would say maybe the technical glitches was in our favor, because you need to listen to the points that he did make. It was not only ideal for an opening remark, but also a very good way to kind of wrap up everything that has been said, both from other people that give the opening remarks, the overview we had from the question lead, the reviewers, and also the specific chapter overviews that we did listen to. So on that note, we've made good progress. Our target was to actually end by 2:30, and we started late, almost 10 minutes late, and we're good in terms of how we handle the time. So in closing, I'll be inviting Professor Desmond to give us the closing remarks, really, and the vote of thanks, everyone that has been involved in this project, as well as the faculty of government.
Let me start by saying I'm sorry for the technical glitches. Honestly, it wasn't something we envisaged, and that's why you saw me running from there to here to ensure that things were fixed. A lot has been said about the book, so I will just say one thing that has been left out is that what the book tried to do, apart from being a collection of 19 chapters, exporting across countries within the continent. We try to give its voice to new and emerging researchers. If you pick a copy of the book, if you're able to purchase one, you will see that most of the authors are largely not the voices we hear as far as IP is concerned. So the book has tried to fill that gap by giving a voice to new and emerging researchers, not just as academics, but even for practice, for policymakers and industry. The book is, please put it up. I'll get to that point. But before I get to letting you know how you can get a copy of your book, let me start quickly by saying some brief thanks, and that is what I'm supposed to do here. It's a collaboration of three schools, three institutions: the University of the Western Cape through CAFU and the Private Law Department, the University of Cape Town through the SACHI IP chair, and the International Research International Trade and Research Center in Abuja, led by Mr. Sand Bakalu, and it's also part of the All African IP Summit, that has been running for the seventh year now. And the collections were drawn from, like Dr. Mutiza said, the collections were drawn from the 2024 summit and other contributions from outside the summit. So thank you to Director of CAFU for your support. She has provided some snacks for us, which we'll receive once we leave here, just by the next room. The water and everything was provided by CAFU. Thanks to the dean, to my dean, and to my head of department for the support. Thanks to IP chair, led by Professor Caroline Okumbe. She's always there. I call her my academic mother. So she's been supportive from being my PhD supervisor and also providing the support for Dr. Charlene Caesar, who is one of the editors. Of course, thanks to ITRC in Abuja, led by Mr. Sam Bakalu. Thanks to my colleagues, friends, my family, my girls, and all right. So like I said, you'll find we only have some few copies. I mean, as publishers, we know what happens with as authors of books, we know what happens with our publishers. They give us only very few. I only got 3 copies, and I think Charlene has 3 copies. And the 3 copies are distributed already. One is going to the library of the University of the Western Cape, so you can pick a copy of it after you're done. Yes, and the others will be going to the professor who contributed the forward to the book, Professor Chidi Wamanan from the University of Ottawa in Canada. So please, if you really want to, and I urge you to get a copy for yourself, you can purchase one from the website. I see that it's quite expensive, but there is the ebook version. Please try to get a copy. You would really not regret getting a copy for yourself. I think I've spoken too much. Please lunch just a few snacks, in the next room for lunch. And please let me also use the opportunity to present a copy to the library. Law library, so you can access a copy from the law library. So that is all from me. Thank you once again for your patience, for your time, and for all the support so far. Thank you. And God bless
We almost formally bring the launch to an end. The launch of the book is only the first part of everything in terms of what the editors and everyone that contributed to the book projects aims to achieve. So we're launching the book, so officially it's in the market, so to say. But beyond that, really, the desire and the goal of every writer is that people should get to read their works and engage in it. And we have different capacities through which we can actually engage with this. As an academic, again, I want to see how I can use it to build knowledge. As a practitioner, I want to see how it can get into the world of everyone. Then also for policymakers, the intention of the book is that they're able to also use that as a tool or as a mainstream to see what areas that reforms can happen in order to make sure that we're able to use IP rights or IP broadly in Africa to be able to pursue the sustainable development goals that we truly need, especially to address very real and practical issues like Mr. Sand Bakalu mentioned, poverty. Yeah, so how do we use really IP rights? Not just the fancy things, but how do we use it to build AI and what have you? How do we use it to make sure that people are able to get 3 square meals How do we use it to create employment and all that? So those are really the main issues. So on that note, on behalf of organizers, the editors, tutors, the reviewers, and the institutional partners that Professor Desmond did mention, to say thank you. And also our online attendees, thank you for being with us. Because no one left it. I think the way we started, in fact, we had more people join us. So thank you so much for your patience. We now invite you to kindly please join us. Very light launch on this other side of it. Thank you from the program director. Not much.